Today, I go through every movie I reviewed in 2023 and put them on a tier list. If you watched any of those videos, you were wasting your time because you could have just watched this one. I'm going to skip through each movie pretty quickly because there's 51 of them. If you're curious about any of the individual films, then go check out the video I made about each of them. For this tier list, we're going to be using the Tobin rating system, meaning that we have one tier, which is 16. Just kidding. We'll be using a standard tier list. Hopefully, I'll be able to remember what each of these little thumbnails represents. I know the first one, at least, is across 110th Street. I used to live across 110th Street. I still live across 110th Street, but in the other direction. I used to live north of there. And this movie sort of has a special place in my heart. It turns out that whenever I try to review a blaxploitation film on this channel, it doesn't really end up being a blaxploitation film, except a few that we'll touch on shortly. But this, I think, is going to go, tough already. I'm going to put this in B, but I haven't really gotten my bearings yet, so we'll see. Things might move around. Next, we have Black Lolita, which is sort of a true exploitation film, although it's really, I think I said in the video, almost an exploitation of exploitation films itself, almost a cheap copy of an exploitation film, which is already, in some ways, a cheap copy of something else. This is a truly awful movie. Amateur, one of the worst movies I've reviewed on this channel ever. I have no clue what happens in this film. The plot is impossible to follow and not worth following. It's not worth investing in. But is all of that counteracted by the film's one entertaining gimmick, which is that it is in 3D? No. The 3D is terrible in this movie, and frankly, you're better off watching it without your 3D glasses than with them. It's kind of painful either way. Next, we have Baba Yaga, which is also sort of in the exploitation genre a little bit. This is a giallo film, I guess. We're gonna put this in. I think. This is tough, guys. I think this can go in C for now. There are certain things that have a place in my heart about Baba Yaga. There's certain things that are kind of fun about it, but the movie, like many giallo films, kind of crumbles under its own weight, all sort of edginess, very little actual coherency or meaning. I don't know. I tried to tease out a few metaphors. I think that I did a pretty good video about it. But yeah, I think C tier for Baba Yaga. Next is Godard's Contempt, which is an S tier movie. And yeah, I have nothing more to say about that, but you can go watch the video where I discuss it at great length. That is a movie that has meant a lot to me over the years, although to be honest, when I watched it this time, I saw it in theaters. I saw it at the Film Forum, and I was let down a little bit. It was not quite as potent for me this time as it has been other times in my life. This was a very important movie to me, and I thought it was going to be life-changing to see it in theaters, but when I watched it, I kind of got the feeling, in some ways, the time for this movie in your life has passed, which is okay. It's still an S-tier movie. Incredible. Next is Celine and Julie Go Boating. I think I'm going to put this in the B tier. This is a fun movie, Jacques Rivette. It's playful. It has some interesting meta cognition going on, I guess. But it is very long and very slow. So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's uncharitable, but I'd put that in the B tier, I guess. Next, we have Cat Ballou, which is going in the same place. Cat Ballou, I actually was surprised how good this was. Somebody commented on the video saying, it was my mother's favorite film, and that checks out completely. This is your mom's favorite movie. But hey, I had fun watching it. I think it's going to go in the B tier. Yeah. Next, we have Cat City, which is, I guess, a Hungarian movie, animated film. This was when I was doing the Cat series. You're never going to believe this, but apparently the Criterion channel in January is doing a series of cat films. Am I psychic? Have I presaged the future? Is someone who's programming those that stuff watching this channel? Probably none of those things. Probably a coincidence. Still, we did it here first, the Cat series. Cat City is an admirable movie in some ways, I think. It has kind of the fun, Eastern European feel a little bit. It has the traces of communist regime in it. But at the end of the day, I don't know. It's hard to see this as much more than a kid's movie. And if you're not from Hungary and not nostalgic about it, I don't know how much mileage you're actually going to get out of it. But it is fun. I mean, if you do watch it, I think you'll enjoy it. I enjoyed it. It's a cool movie. Next, this is this is The Conformist, which is also an S tier movie. I also saw that at the Film Forum on a date this time, which might not have been a very good idea. But yeah, S tier movie. Is it as good as Contempt? Maybe not, but if you watch my video on it, I think you'll see that that is a remarkably deep movie, one of Bertolucci's finest. Okay, next we have Cat People, another film from the Cat series, and this one I think is also going in the C tier. This movie had some things going for it. It's kind of cool, it's kind of vibey, but at the end of the day, I just didn't think it was that great, and I don't really have a lot more to say about it than that. Next, we have Deliverance, which is a movie starring Helen Keller, the real Helen Keller, and this is going in the C tier. This is an interesting movie, but if you are curious about Helen Keller, you should just watch a documentary about Helen Keller. There were some made in her lifetime which she appears in, and those are better than this movie, almost certainly. This is just sort of a very standard silent film, which with one quite interesting gimmick, but that wears off somewhat quickly. I think they could have done a lot more with this than they did. So not an earth-shattering movie, but an interesting oddity nonetheless. This is Drowning by Numbers. Yes, this is Drowning by Numbers. I'm going to put this in the B tier movie. Cool, lots of texture, lots of vibes. Maybe this is A tier. I don't know. I'm sort of torn. Next, we have Eyes Wide Shut, which is an A tier movie or an S tier movie. I will say that when I watched this movie, I got the feeling that this is like one of the most well-made films in existence. I really don't like when people talk about a movie as being well done or well-made, because it doesn't really mean much. But with this film, you just get the feeling that it's like, oh yeah, this is what movies from the future are going to be. Stanley Kubrick, he put in a lot of time. He figured out a lot of stuff. This is the pinnacle, in some ways, of his work. In other ways, I think it's actually somewhat less potent than some of his earlier, somewhat simpler, in some ways, movies. I don't know. I'm torn on this. I'm going to put it in the A tier for now, but we'll see. I might shuffle some things around. Fritz the Cat was probably my favorite movie of the Cat series, and I'm going to put it in the B tier. This is just a really fun. This is a great movie. It holds up way better than I expected to. It still packs satirical punch today. In fact, maybe even more so today than at other points. I don't quite feel like I have enough context of the era. I'm not quite old enough to assess everything it's doing, but I really enjoyed that movie. What can I say? Okay, next is In Cold Blood. This is a solid A-tier movie, I think. Really chilling. It's an old movie, surprisingly chilling, and it is no exaggeration to say that it kind of inspired the whole true crime film genre, so pretty cool. Next, we have Lolita, which is also going in the A tier. Lolita was not at all what I expected it to be. It's interesting because Eyes Wide Shut is better than Lolita, so this tier thing isn't quite working out. I might have to shuffle some things around. Who knows? Who cares, really? But Lolita wasn't at all what I expected it to be. Much more comedic than I had realized. Peter Sellers doing his thing, but it has a punch. It plays off the classical Hollywood cinema really effectively. Go check out the video about it if you're curious. For my full thoughts, Last Tango in Paris. This is another movie that was not at all what I expected. I think this will go in the A tier as well. I really like this movie. Maybe this is an S tier movie. I don't know. It's a shame that this movie has been so overshadowed by controversy, and I don't mean that in a sense of, oh, why are people making such a big deal about X, Y, and Z? I think outside of the movie, maybe some of the controversy is well-founded. It's just a shame that it happened. Inside the film, I think the legacy of this movie is weird. It's not the scene that everybody talks about is really a tiny sliver of this movie, and I think this is a safe film for just about anyone, even the lactose intolerant, to watch. Cool movie. Is it as cool as The Conformist? I don't know, but great movie. Okay, next we have Monster, which is the newest Hirokazu Koreeda film, and this I'm also really torn about. I think this is going in the S tier for me. I really like Hirokazu Koreeda. Probably my favorite living director. I don't know. I mean, you talk about mature humanist films, there's nobody really who can top him. Now, when I watched this movie and when I did the video, I did pick up on some somewhat less subtle touches, on some maybe creeping television influence in the film. And I detail that in the review. I go into specifics about how I think the film's writer may have influenced this movie. This movie was not written by Correda, who usually writes most of his films. He's written most of them for the last 20 years or whatever. This was written by somebody else, and I think it shows a little bit, but still, this is such a beautiful movie. I said in the review, and I think it's still true, that this film has one of the greatest scenes I have ever seen in it. The music is incredible. It was the last film scored by Ryuichi Sakamoto. This is a movie that has stuck with me for a long time. The video I did is okay, but it's hard to even capture the true just power of this movie. So I think this is an S tier one for me, but I will admit that it could have been a little bit more subtle in certain areas. Okay, next we have Myra Breckinridge. So I'm going to put Myra Breckinridge in... I think in the C tier. Yeah. My big conclusion about Myra Breckinridge, you should watch my video about it from just a couple weeks ago, long video. I was very interested in this movie. My big conclusion is that it's underrated, and this movie is actually not anywhere near as bad as people think. People think it's terrible. It's not terrible. It's actually good. It's actually fun, I think. Yes, controversial for a reason, and yeah, it's a huge mess, and it's not really effective, but it's, I think, a great movie, especially if you're a cinephile of any description. It's totally worth watching Myra Breckinridge, and I think if you can get around some of the controversy, you might even enjoy it. And I think that in some ways the movie hasn't aged well at all, but I think its overall comedic stylings of just being unyieldingly ironic and never really letting you in on where the joke is, I think that actually fits today's humor sensibilities really well. So in some ways, this movie has aged well. In other ways, it's aged terribly. But that's true of, almost every boundary-pushing movie of the past. Okay, next we have Manila in the Jaws of Light, Manila in the Claws of Light, Manila in the Claws of the Light, something like that. This is an A-tier movie. I remember this movie just being, this is great. I don't know if I have a lot to say about this movie, except then that it was really cool. It surprised me with some of the angles in it, which I'm not going to spoil. There's a lot of fun homages to other existing films in this movie. Yeah, I was really surprised. I've been sort of meaning to watch this movie for years and years, and I finally got around to it, and I was sort of kicking myself that I hadn't seen it earlier. Okay, now a very recent film, the last one on this channel, I think. Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. The movie with David Bowie, Japanese movie, starring David Bowie. This is a baffling movie to me, to be honest. I'm going to stick it in the B tier. This is a baffling movie. The first half of it, I was thinking, what are we doing here? This movie has some magic in it. It works in a really interesting way. Negi Soshima is the director, and I'm curious to watch more of his films because I think he has the knack for some pretty unorthodox storytelling, and this movie has that. I still don't exactly know what to make of it, but certain parts of it will stick with me. There's certain things that are pretty obviously virtuous about the movie, and other things, like I said, that I'm still sort of coming to terms with. This is another one where I kind of wish I didn't have to do, well, I don't have to, but I kind of wish that I wasn't doing weekly videos, and I could have spent more time with this movie, talking about it and thinking about it. But hey, it's a cool movie. Okay, next we have Night Moves. This is going in the B tier as well. Honestly, I don't remember much about this movie. I think it's a little one-dimensional, but pretty cool for what it was. Okay, next we have One from the Heart, which was the huge Francis Ford Coppola flop. This is also going in the B tier. I think this movie is better than people realize. Ornate, has some really cool stuff in it, but also it's lacking a little bit of oomph. It's a little bit confused. Francis Ford Coppola, not the first time he would get a bit lost. Okay, next we have Popeye. This is in the D tier for me. Yeah, look, if you really like quirky stuff, if you're an ironic guy, you might like this movie. If you are not, do not watch this movie. It is a huge botch. It's kind of insane the amount of money, time, and energy that went into making a movie that was so bad. It's one of these situations where you wonder, how did nobody anywhere along the massive crew, the huge production, a lot of people that this had to go through, I don't know. How did nobody realize that this movie was headed for total disaster? There are some things about it that are endearing, and I think I gave this movie credit for a lot of things in the review. But overall, I regret having seen this movie. What can I say? Next, we have Prince of the City. This is going in S tier. This is my favorite cop film. This is a rare fusion between a brilliant sort of suspenseful action movie and a really incisive humanist social drama. It's so rare to find a movie that does that. In fact, I would recommend, if you're an aspiring director or writer, don't try, because it's so hard to get the balance right. But somehow, in this film, Sidney Lumet gets it spot on. Wow. Really cool. Okay. Next, this is Pocket Full of Miracles. I think this is going in the D tier. This is a Frank Capra movie from the 60s, I guess. This was his last feature film, I think, something like that. And it's totally unremarkable. I watched this movie because there's some talk. If you hear about Frank Capra, you hear about how he was a pre-war director. He basically invented the screwball comedy. But once World War II ended, he never really made successful movies again, except for one particularly famous one in 1946. But after that, he was kind of out. And people say that this is because his films were, based around a sort of Depression era or pre-war or, during the war. It's sort of optimistic American populist thing, the Frank Capra thing, and that just wasn't legible to people after the war. I was curious about this, so I thought, let's watch a movie from later on. In fact, let's watch his last one. And I wanted to see what Frank Capra making a movie in the 60s would be like. Unfortunately, this movie is set in the past. It's actually a remake of one of his earlier movies. And yeah, it was not very notable. It has sort of an interesting cast, like Columbo guy, what's his name, is in it, in one of his early roles. And Gary Cooper is in it, and some other people. No, not Gary Cooper. What's his name? Anyway, it's not very notable movie. There's like one or two shots in it that I thought were cool and sort of ahead of their time, and that's it. Otherwise, don't bother. It's not as bad as these other two, but it's just there's no point. And it's worse than anything else that I put into C tier. Okay. Next, we are going to talk about, let's do, Scarecrow, one of the rare films that I use green text for the thumbnail. This is a terrible thumbnail image. I don't know what I was thinking when I chose it. I don't even know what it's a picture of. And it breaks the branding of the channel completely using green text. I'm going to put Scarecrow in B tier. Cool to see... what's his name? Dustin Hoffman? No. Who's in this movie? Al Pacino in a comedic role. Let me just make sure I got that spot on. But the movie I think is a little one-dimensional. This is like one of the most 70s movies you will ever find. Gene Hackman, Al Pacino. That's right. This is one of the most like 1970s films you will ever find. And if you are into 70s movies, then I think you'll dig it. If you're not, don't start with this one because it's so just sort of understated. But it's nice. Some memorable things in Scarecrow. Okay. Next. Oh, what's this one? Soy Cuba. This, I think, is going in the A tier. This is just such an interesting feat of production, an interesting historical crossover. This is a Soviet film. I think this is directed by Mikhail Kalatozov, who we reviewed one of his other movies, The Red Tent, a while ago. And I'm thinking about doing some of his other films in the future. This is a film, Soy Cuba, obviously made about and in Cuba. And it is a pretty powerful narrative, but the production itself is kind of the star of the show here. The style is all over the place. And yeah, the thumbnail here says the pinnacle of an unknown genre. And it really feels like this is a different grammar. This is a different thing, but they went all out for it. And it's cool to see. There's some really famous tracking shots in this movie as well. Yeah, I think that's in the A tier. Okay. Brutally intimate. This is Scenes from Marriage, the Ingmar Bergman movie. This is going in the A tier for me. Some people might make a case for this being in the S tier, but this movie didn't quite do it. For me, I haven't seen a lot of Bergman films, and I'd like to expand on that, but I don't know. The ones that I watched don't quite live up to my expectations in some ways. I think that his brand of humanism is a little bit different than what I am most centered on. So I don't know. I'm going to stop before I say a whole bunch of more naive things, but you can go watch the video about it. In some ways, this movie is like right up my alley. Should be exactly the kind of like serious social drama, humanist, psychological realism kind of thing that I really like. This movie wasn't quite it for me, but it is obviously an extremely cool thing. It's a great movie. Okay. Splendor in the Grass, B tier. I watched this after watching The Arrangement, which is coming up, and this is another one of Elia Kazan's later movies. This one is nowhere near as interesting. I didn't think this movie, it just did not connect with me anywhere near as much. It's a great performance, memorable performance from Natalie Wood. But otherwise, this movie doesn't stick in my mind a ton, I guess. But I think B tier is probably fair. Seance on a Wet Afternoon. We're also going to stick this in the B tier. This is a Brian Forbes movie, I think. And I first was introduced to him when I watched The L-Shaped Room, which is an extremely good movie. Oh, there might be another Brian Forbes movie on here too. I forget. And I was hoping to see something of that magnitude again, and this isn't quite there, but it's a cool movie. Very British, but cool movie. Okay. Now we have two movies actually in one video because it's the Stepford Wives and the remake of the Stepford Wives. And I'm going to only count the original here, and I'm actually going to put it, I think, in the A tier. I think the original Stepford Wives is really a good movie that has aged quite well, and is absolutely worth watching. The remake would go down in the D tier because it is complete garbage, but we're just going to ignore that I even talked about it. Okay, next we have Targets. This one was pretty recent. Peter Bogdanovich's first film, Boris Karloff's last film. This is a movie for cinephiles. It's a quirky movie that feels not at all like you would expect it, not at all like what should have been being made at the time. It's a lot of weird crossovers, a lot of interesting stuff, some cool meta commentary. So it ticks all the cinephile boxes completely, but as an actual movie, is it that amazing to watch? It's fine. It's pretty cool, but it's not going to blow your mind, I think. So B tier it is. Okay. Next up, we have possibly the most controversial pick on this list, which is The Arrangement from Elia Kazan, and it is going in the S tier for me. This is a notoriously panned film that was hated upon its release, I think, and has yet to see any critical resurgence whatsoever, except on this channel, and yet it's going in the S tier for me. And I will say right now that I think this is a somewhat inflated rating, and this probably belongs at most in the A tier. For whatever reason, this film just connected very deeply with me. I think it's possible that I was just going through something in my personal life, and this movie just came along at the right moment to really, really have a deep impact on me. I did rewatch it, actually. So I watched this film twice this year. I made the video. I couldn't believe. I mean, the thumbnail is, am I losing it? Because I couldn't believe how much I liked this movie, given, what I'd seen about it and what I heard about it, which is that it sucks and it's terrible. I watched it again, and I can see it definitely has some flaws. The pacing is all over the place, especially in the end. It bogs down way too much. Still, this movie is so great. I don't know. On my channel, or in my video, I talk extensively about why I think that it failed when it was released. And it's basically that it came out at the wrong time, and it was not kind of the right movie for the time. It felt too old, but it also felt too new, right? So just didn't really nail its time and place. But if you watch it now, you're probably not going to know anything about that. And look, the movie completely blew my mind. So that's The Arrangement. And I got to put it in the S tier because that was probably the biggest movie of the year for me. But I will admit, that might just be me. Okay, now we have Tar. I think this is going in the B tier. It's okay. I don't know. I mean, it's nice that people try to make, modern, as in like high modernism films still. But we sort of lost our practice at it, and they're not that great. This movie is decent, but it's really nothing to write home about. If you want a movie about music, I could give you 5 that are far, far, far superior. Next, we have The Changeling. I think this is also going in the B tier. Although The Changeling is good. Well, and The Changeling I think is better than Tar, although there's such different movies. This is a horror film. I don't do many movies like this on the channel. In some ways, it's a little one-dimensional, but it does sort of allude to some different ideas here and there. But mainly, you watch this for the thrills, and it delivers. Pretty cool, great cast, and set in Washington State, I think, where I grew up, so that's cool. Okay. Next, we have The Cruel Sea. This, I think, is going in B tier, although that's pretty harsh, because I remember thinking this movie was really good. But I don't remember a ton about it, to be honest. So we're going to stick it there. British sort of naval film, but maybe this should go in A tier. Well, I don't know. I'm just going to leave it B tier. Okay. Next, we have The Cook, the thief, his wife, and her lover, or whatever this movie's called, and that's going in A tier. Yeah, so this is the second Peter Greenaway movie on the list, although it was the first one that I covered. This is a really cool movie. It's a great introduction to the director. This film is just all over the place. It is extreme. Yeah, you might want to double check the content advisor before watching, but hey, cool movie. It'll hit you in the face. Okay, next we have The Desert of the Tartars. This is also probably one of the discoveries of the year for me. And I'm torn between putting this in S tier and A tier. I'm going to put it in S tier, although I think, again, I don't think it quite deserves that. This movie is incredibly cool looking. It's one of the best shot films I've ever seen. I mean, it is amazing, the way it looks. And it has a very powerful metaphor at the core of it that I think about a lot. I mean, this movie feels deeply, deeply applicable to my life, at least. Make of that what you will. The movie is slowly paced, and it is a little bit impersonal. So I don't know if it is really an S tier movie, but it's got a great cast and an incredible look. It's a unique movie. I think it's fair to put it up there. Okay, next we have, what is this? Oh, this is The Intruder. We'll put this in B tier. So this is a Roger Corman movie about civil rights. It's a good movie. Yeah, it's a good movie. It's sort of interesting in some ways that it took Roger Corman of all people to actually make one of the more, to sort of take a stand on civil rights before a lot of mainstream Hollywood would or could. This is a good movie. Okay, next we have Sundays with Sibel. This is also going in B tier. Great performance from Patricia Goetze. Some nice moments about it, but this movie doesn't stick in my memory super deeply. Okay, next we have, what is this? The Key. Next we have The Key, which is a movie about a tugboat during World War II. This is going, I think, in the C tier. Kind of a cool idea. Good performance from whoever is the woman in this movie. But is it Claudia Cardinale? Could she be in it? No. I forget who's in this. Anyway, this movie doesn't really stick in my mind, though, much. And this is not as good, not anywhere near as good as The Cruel Sea, which I put in B tier and maybe should go in A tier. So just go watch that movie. It's way better. Okay, next we have To Live and Die in L.A., one of Willem Dafoe's earlier movies, and I think we'll put this one in B tier as well. Any fans of the channel will know that I don't really like the 1980s, and that's a strike against this movie. I don't know. The more distance that I get from this movie, I think my impression of it has actually gone down a little bit compared to when I first watched it. But this is a cool movie. There is some depth. Um, okay, next we have The Tree of Wooden Clogs, Hermano Olmi. This is going in A tier. It is a little bit one-dimensional and a little bit too slow, but this is a cool and kind of one-of-a-kind movie. Next, we have The Passenger. So this is one of three, I think, English movies by Michelangelo Antonioni. It's got Jack Nicholson and Maria Schneider in it. Very interesting pairing there. And this movie delivers for the most part. It is not super accessible. This is like I think, a very deconstructionist film. And if you're not kind of hip to that, it's not going to make any sense. And it's going to seem like kind of nonsensical. But I think what I said in the video is that Antonioni, for me, is a director of extremely poignant moments, and this movie's got them. And it's got some poignant central metaphors as well. So, cool movie, but doesn't quite make it to the S tier just because it is not accessible at all and really slow. Okay, next, we have The Tin Drum. This is an S tier movie, I think. This movie really, this is another one I've been putting off for a long time. This movie kind of blew my mind. In some ways, it's a little bit dated, but this movie's so cool. So ahead of its time. You should just go watch the video about it, or better yet, just go watch. The movie, it is pretty extreme in some ways. The second half maybe slows down a little bit, but this is a special movie, I think. Okay, next, this is The Towering Inferno. I think we'll put this in B tier, I guess. Disaster movies are kind of interesting. They usually have some sort of social anxieties wrapped up in them, and this one is, no exception. This is a cool movie. It's not as one-dimensional as I had expected. The spectacle is there. It's an interesting cast, and there's some interesting subtext as well. There's a lot that you can read into this movie, but at the end of the day, it is just kind of a disaster movie. Next, we have Underground. And I think this is probably going in the S tier, although that might be a little bit too much. I mentioned, in my video, I set everything up by saying that Underground used to be my favorite movie when I was in high school, and in the beginning of college, this was like my go-to. This movie had an enormous influence on me. But it's sort of a polarizing movie, and Kusturica is kind of an interesting guy, so I wasn't at all sure what I would think of it when I watched it this time. It was honestly pretty dramatic for me to revisit it and see, is this movie actually any good, or was this just, folly of the youth for me to have been so enamored by it? And it is good. This is a great movie. It is so vibrant and there's so much character in it. Let me put it that way. And it kind of is the ultimate movie. It's kind of the ultimate, the pillar of this new Balkan cinema thing. Yes, I do question whether or not it's sort of over the top and stereotypical in some ways, and I think it probably is. So I don't know if this quite deserves to be on the S tier, but it's still a great movie. And yeah, if you're a fan of international cinema, then you gotta watch. I do think The Tin Drum is probably a little bit better. And interestingly, they sort of both live in the same realm of magical realism. The Tin Drum is much older than Underground, which is actually, that came out in 1995. And when I first saw it, I thought, wow, this is so unprecedented, so crazy, so earth-shattering. Watching it again, having a lot more historical context, I thought, well, actually, not so much. But still, Underground is like, it's a lightning bolt of a movie, and also a lightning rod of a movie. Look, I think it's great. And yeah, maybe not quite S tier, but I'm gonna put it there anyway. Okay, next we have Velvet Goldmine. This movie, I'm torn between A and B. I think it's going to stay in the B tier. And that, I don't know, maybe that's a little bit harsh. Maybe it should go in A. I don't know. This movie is kind of all about style, I would say. There's some stuff about memory. There's a new Todd Haynes movie out right now, May, December, which I've not seen yet. I might see that at some point. That's another Washington State story, I think. This movie also has this thing about remembering, this thing about looking back, and it really gets the spirit of the music right. I think this is probably the best movie about pop music that I've ever seen, and there's a lot of ways to make a movie about pop music that comes out kind of lame and undercooked. This movie sidesteps all of them. So, yeah, I think I'm going to move that up to A tier, actually. Okay. Next, we have When the Cat Comes, and this is my co-favorite, probably, movie from the Cat series, along with Fritz the Cat. Although it's interesting, maybe both of these should move up to A tier. Whatever, doesn't matter too much. Okay, next we have When Love Has Gone. When the Love Has Gone, whatever this movie's called. Yeah, I'm gonna put this down in D tier. Totally not notable. It was roughly based on the Lana Turner story. If you're not aware, Lana Turner's daughter stabbed her boyfriend or something like that. This was a big tabloid story back in the day, and an interesting piece of trivia even today. This movie, in theory, is about that, but it's not really about that. The story's been completely morphed into something else. I do think my video about it was sort of interesting because really what you're seeing here is Hollywood kind of making a movie about itself and making a movie about one of its shames, one of its tabloid scandals. It's interesting that they transmogrified everything into something else rather than it being about an actress like Lana Turner. It's about a fine artist, for instance. That's interesting. But frankly, this movie is not good. So I wouldn't really recommend it. And finally, we close things off with 0 Hour, which is probably also going down in the D tier. This is the movie that Airplane is a spoof of. You've maybe seen online a side-to-side comparison of 0 Hour and Airplane, showing, wow, look, they just copied it exactly, note for note. Well, if you watch the movies, if you sit down and actually watch the whole thing, like I did, you'll see that that is not the case. Obviously, they are pretty similar, and Airplane's a takeoff of that, as well as a couple other things like Airport. But on its own, this movie is okay. This is one of the better movies in the D tier, but it's really not notable or worth watching. If you want a good airplane disaster movie from back in the day, I would recommend instead the Jimmy Stewart film No Highway in the Sky. I watched that, in fact, on an airplane a couple weeks ago, and that's a pretty good movie. So I'm going to, I think, run through the list one more time, just so we are all sure. This isn't really perfect. There's some inconsistencies here, but whatever. It's in the ballpark. So in the S tier, we have Contempt, The Conformist, Monster, Prince of the City, The Arrangement, Desert of the Tartars, The Tin Drum, and Underground. And those are all cool movies that you should watch. If you haven't seen one of those, might be worth checking out. Some of them come with some caveats. Yeah, whatever. I'm not going to read the other ones, but this, I think, has been a good year. Looking at the list, there are a few here that I think, why the heck did I watch that? I think some of them still made good videos, but hopefully in 2024, I'll be able to find, I'll be able to sidestep some of the more disastrous turn of events. I will not be watching any Popeye-related films. If you have any ideas for things that I should check out going forward, or do with the channel in general, let me know. Let me say thank you to all the people who tuned in for this year. This is a niche channel. That's the nature of it. But I do enjoy some of the interaction that I've had with viewers. I do enjoy hearing people's memories and people's thoughts about different movies, people's musings. It is extremely interesting, especially with some more obscure movies that I really watch kind of in a vacuum. It's really interesting to hear the thoughts from somebody who might have experienced it when it came out, somebody who might be from the place where the movie is from or something like that, or just somebody who has seen it and has some thoughts about it. That kind of stuff, it's worth its weight in gold. So hopefully more of that in 2024. And otherwise, I think you could probably expect more of the same. I've already seen some pretty interesting movies this winter that I'm looking forward to making videos about. And maybe next year we'll see where they fall on this very list.